Good morning, y'all. Today is episode 2 of our Potager Garden Design Series. Today we will be talking about the top 10 elements of a potager garden. If you haven't seen episode 1, which was the definition and the history of a potager garden, y'all go check that out. First of all, there's no hard rules to designing a potager garden. There's so many different designs and styles and sizes. There's informal potager gardens and there's formal potager gardens. There's just so many different ways that you can design and create your potager garden. So first and foremost, I think your potager garden should reflect your style, your personality, your character, and your needs. So today I'm just going to take you through my potager garden and we're going to take a look at the top 10 elements that I think clearly define a potager garden. Now this potager garden is still a work in progress. I still have a long way to go to get it to where I want to be. But I've already got a lot of the elements that make up a beautiful potager garden in place here. And I just want to take you through my garden. We'll take a look at the top 10 things that I think clearly defines a potager garden. And I believe it's going to be very helpful for you in creating and designing your potager garden. Number 1, your potager garden should be close to your kitchen. It should be convenient for you to walk right out of your kitchen door and into your garden and harvest some fresh herbs, a quick salad, a few vegetables for dinner or lunch, whatever you need as you're preparing a meal. If it is on the other side of your property and too far away from the kitchen, then you simply won't use it. I always envision the peasants walking from their kitchens of their little thatched roof cottages with their harvest baskets in hand and harvesting all the ingredients they need to make their potage soup. Number 2, potager gardens are year-round permanent gardens. Potager gardens are different from the market garden style, or your typical vegetable garden that's just tilled up for a season and planted in long rows. And a potager garden is not necessarily intended for growing large amounts of produce to sell commercially. Although, depending on the size of your garden, you could possibly sell from it on a small scale. We did this past year. Last year, we sold some of the vegetables and herbs from my potager garden to a CSA. We participated in a CSA at Orville Farmers Market this past year, and we did sell some of the produce and some of the vegetables and herbs from the potager garden, and still had a lot for us to eat fresh and to preserve and put up for the winter. So I guess it just really depends on the size of it. But really, a potager garden is intended more for like your personal use, like your own personal grocery store or your own personal pharmacy or even florist shop. It's a year-round garden. The beds, you keep the beds year-round. You're continually adding to the beds, adding soil, adding compost, adding nutrients back to the soil. So it's a year-round garden with a mix of evergreens and perennials and flowers and vegetables and herbs. Number 3, a potager garden is as much about beauty as it is function. Your potager garden should be a garden that feeds your soul as well as feeds your body. It should be a place that you love and enjoy. a place you'll spend hours dreaming and planning, working and meditating and praying, cultivating, building soil, sowing seed, and reaping harvest. A place you'll learn, you'll grow, and you'll heal. Weeding the garden, deadheading the flowers and herbs, pruning. All of this is just therapy to me. It's mindless task that where you can just be, your mind can be free to think and to pray and to meditate. So my garden is a healing place for me. It's therapy for me. Your garden will be a place of refuge that just feeds your soul and your spirit emotionally and mentally, as well as physically, from growing healthy food and medicines. The Potager Garden is a beautiful, diverse mixture of herbs, culinary herbs, medicinal herbs, herbs for household uses, herbs for beauty products, dyes, herbal teas. It should be full of flowers, annual flowers, perennial flowers, flowers for cutting, flowers for arrangements, flowers to make medicine and products out of, and flowers just for the sheer beauty that they bring to the garden, and flowers that attract beneficials to your garden. It should be full of fruit, fruiting trees, fruiting vines, fruiting shrubs. It should be full of vegetables, annual vegetables, perennial vegetables. Warm season vegetables that you can grow during the summer and the hotter months, and cool season vegetables that you can grow in the fall and early spring and winter to provide food for you all throughout the year. It should be full of roses. Your potager garden should have climbing roses over arches. It should have shrub roses. It should just be full of roses for fragrance and beauty and uses. You can create medicine out of roses. You can create some beautiful pastries and desserts from rose petals. You can create beauty products from roses. Your potager garden should be full of evergreens, evergreen trees, evergreen walls, evergreen shrubs that just adds year-round interest to your garden. The potager garden should have so much diversity in it that it attracts tons of beneficial insects and birds. It creates habitats for them where they want to just live in your garden. It's basically a garden full of beauty and life. Number 4, every potager garden should have a beautiful, welcoming entrance. One that invites you in and makes you feel as though you're entering a magical place. It could be very elaborate and formal or very simple and informal. It could be as simple as a handmade wooden gate with wildflowers all around it, or as elaborate as stone columns, iron gates, roses dripping over magnificent arches. It could be just a 4x4 post with cattle panels attached to it to create an arch entrance with roses or grapes or fragrant flowers and vines, gourds, melons hanging from it. It could be a real door, like in The Secret Garden, the story of The Secret Garden. It could be painted a bright color or an earthy color, whichever expresses your style. It could be an iron gate with roses flanking each side like mine. It could be as simple as the use of plants, like 2 evergreens in containers surrounded by ground covers on each side of the entrance with a defined pathway between the two that'll lead you into the garden. There's so many ways to create an entrance to the garden. No matter how simple or how extraordinary it is, every potager needs a welcoming entrance. Number 5. Potager gardens usually have some type of enclosure or walls surrounding the garden. Now, this is something that I have not quite yet achieved in our potager garden, but we are working on it. I want to enclose the whole garden with living walls. And by creating these walls or enclosures surrounding your garden, it creates a room. It makes the garden feel like it's a space of its own. It creates privacy. It makes the garden feel more like an intimate, private room to refuge to. It also keeps pests and unwanted wildlife out of the garden. And this is one of our goals also, other than beauty, in creating the walls around the garden, is to keep my chickens out of my garden. We want to let our chickens free range, and they always come to my garden and destroy it. So the only time I let my chickens out is when I want them to till up the garden for me or fertilize the garden for me. But when I've got my vegetables in there, I don't want them in there. So part of the reason in our wall is to keep chickens out, to keep deer out, to keep pests and other wildlife out of our garden. Now, these walls can also create some vertical growing space for you in the garden. They can be created from man-made materials such as fences, wooden fences, stone, brick, walls. They can be walls made from cattle panels, chain link fences even. And you can grow roses on these, vines, gourds, melons, fruits, vegetables, cucumbers. You can grow all of these different things on your wall. The wall could actually be the exterior wall of an existing structure, such as your house or a garden shed or I don't know, even a chicken coop, that you could use the wall of that building and let that be part of your garden to help enclose your garden. There can be evergreen living walls, which is what I'm trying to do mostly around my potager garden. And these living walls can be created from evergreens that will get tall, or you can choose certain ones for the certain height that you want them to be. They can be tea olives, they can be arborvitaes, they can be cypress, they can be structures like cattle panel structures with jasmine, evergreen jasmine growing all over them. Those are living walls. They could just be mixed borders, like a mixture of evergreens and deciduous trees and deciduous shrubs and layers of perennials and flowers and ground covers, and create a whole border of this, and that would make like a living wall. Living walls can be espaliered fruit walls. You can espalier pears and figs and persimmons and apples and trellised muscadines and kiwi, and you can actually make your walls out of espaliered and trellised fruits. Number 6, potager gardens should have comfortable, meandering pathways that lead you throughout the garden. You're going to need to be able to get to your beds and to your plants. You've got to be able to get in there to work the beds, to work the plants, to weed them, to harvest them, to fertilize. You've got to be able to get to your plants. I grew a patch of squash and I couldn't even get to the squash without stepping on the vines because I had planted them so densely. So you've got to be careful when you're planting to leave enough space and to leave pathways so that you can actually get in there to your plants and to your harvest. You've also got to think about how you're going to get your materials to your garden, like compost and mulch, etc. What equipment will you need to get into your garden? Is it just a wheelbarrow, or is it a tractor or a lawnmower? You've got to think about your main pathways and the equipment that you're going to need to be able to get into your garden and make your pathways wide enough and long enough so that you can get that equipment in there. Number 7, usually potager gardens have defined borders that go around the individual beds. Now, in formal potager gardens, you typically find like little boxwood hedges that goes around each individual bed. The borders could actually be the beds themselves. For instance, raised bed gardening. If you're building raised beds for your garden beds within your potager garden, then the raised beds, the materials you build those raised beds out of, would actually be your bed borders. Other materials that you could use to create borders around your beds could be things like rock, stone, flagstone, brick, landscape timbers, railroad ties. There's all kinds of different materials that you can use to create borders around your beds. You could also use logs. We had a bad storm which knocked down a lot of our trees, so Jean and Chase cut them into manageable logs, and right now, temporarily, we're using them as bed borders for the garden beds. So there's all kinds of different materials you can use to create borders around your garden beds. Now you could not even use borders and just let your pathways in your garden beds be defined by your materials. Like, for example, this parterre garden at Petals from the Past, you can see the pathways are in gravel, and then you have just the beds, and there's no border around it. So the materials is defining the bed borders. And then here you can see the use of this metal edging, which is really nice because that helps keep the materials where they need to be. And it also could help keep the grass from growing over into the garden. And the metal edging is very nice because you actually don't even see it. Number 8, structure, the bones of the garden. When there is structure in the garden will be beautiful even when nothing's blooming. These are elements that add interest to the garden. They create privacy, provide shade, provide vertical gardening, create focal points within the garden. Now you have to be careful with having too many focal points though, because this can really cause confusion and just make your garden look cluttered. So be careful with having too many pieces, too many focal points, and too many structures within the garden. You need the vertical element in the garden. This keeps your eye moving and creates interest. If everything in the garden, if the whole garden was just flat and had horizontal lines, it would be very boring. So add that vertical element to your garden. Some examples of structure and focal points that could be added to your garden would be things like trellises, gazebos, pergolas, arches, obelisk, moon gates are lovely, gates, fences, walls, whether it be living walls or man-made walls. Terraced beds are a really great way to add structure to your garden. The stacked stone terrace beds, they're beautiful. Ponds, water features, bird baths, specimen trees. Specimen trees are plantings in big, beautiful containers or urns. Swings, benches, tables, sitting spots. There's so many different elements that you can add to your garden that bring structure to your garden. Statues, old bed frames, so many different things you can add. But be careful, like I said earlier, not to add too many things to your garden, too many focal points, because then your garden will be fussy and cluttered. The eye won't know where to settle. It'll just be going crazy. You want to keep things in order with your structures too.
Number 9, utilitarian spaces. Now, these are the spaces that are not necessarily for growing all of the lovely things, but these are spaces that house the tools and the materials that you need to grow all of the lovely things. Now, I believe that these utilitarian structures and spaces should be, when possible, included within the design of your potager garden. If you can't incorporate it into your potager garden, then it needs to be easily accessible from your potager garden, or else you're going to work yourself to death going back and forth, getting your tools, getting your amendments, getting your materials. You're just going to work yourself to death. So it's better if these spaces can be included within the design of your potager garden. They can be very cute, very beautiful, very interesting spaces that adds a lot of structure and beauty to your garden.
This can be a garden shed that houses all your tools and pots and fertilizers, soil amendments, whatever chemicals you use, harvest baskets, seeds, the things that you need every time you're in your garden working. Make it cute and let it reflect the style of your garden. You may also want your greenhouse included within the design of your garden, or like I said earlier, at least near to your garden so that it's easily accessible. I've included my greenhouse within the potager garden here. Now, this is not my dream greenhouse. I really want a glass and stone greenhouse, but this is what we're doing for now. So I've also created a living wall on the other side of it so that you're not necessarily going to see this cattle panel greenhouse from the view of the garden. But it works very well to have the greenhouse within the potager garden because this is where all of my plants are started, my seedlings, potting soil, and it just makes everything so much easier. I think a compost area very close to your garden is very necessary because it just makes it easier to throw your garden waste and garden scraps and cuttings into the compost pile, and it makes it easier to transfer the compost from the pile to your garden. So I think it's very important to have a compost system close to your garden or within your garden.
And number 10, I believe art and history elements should be included in every potager garden. Just think of your potager garden as a blank canvas that you can just express your creativity, you can express your passion, your personality, your interest, your style. Just think of your garden as a blank canvas that you can create your masterpiece however you want to.
Include antique pieces that you have collected or that you found, or even better, things that have been passed down to you from your parents or your grandparents or great grandparents. My garden gates entering into my potager garden was given to me by Jean's mom, and these are so special to me, and they're just the entrance into my garden, and it's so special because these gates, she had these as an entrance into her little secret garden that she had, where she had a big statue of an angel that we had given her when her oldest son, my brother-in-law Bill, when he passed away. And this was just kind of like her little meditation garden. And for her to give me those gates for this garden is just very, very special. It has history, it has memory. Every time I walk through these gates, you know, I think about where they come from. And these urns right here, these little concrete urns, she just gave me these. And these are special too because this one right here was from Jean's Uncle Horace. It was his, and he passed away, gosh, a really long time ago. I barely even knew him, but he was like this avid gardener. He was even on the news one time for growing the biggest, tallest tomato. He was like a super gardener. So this little urn that was Uncle Horace's is pretty special. And then on the other side, this urn, which looks just like it, was Jean's grandmother's, Grandmother Britnell. And she was seriously an angel sent from heaven. Grandmother Britnell was just the most precious person ever. And it is just so incredibly special to me to have my garden gates from Jean's mom, an urn from Jean's grandmother, and an urn from Jean's Uncle Horace. I mean, this is history. This is memories entering into the potager garden. I think it just adds such a special element to your garden when the pieces, the art pieces, the structure pieces, the focal point pieces that are in your garden mean something. They have memory, they have history. Even like your materials, like these rocks that are in my garden that we've incorporated all within my garden. These were given to me by Jean's mom too. These were rocks that she had in her garden and all around her house for years that we all as a family foraged together. We took dirt road trips and foraged all these rocks for her, nearly killed ourselves. Rocks for her and rocks for me. And that's what these rocks are from. All those trips and all those times together out in the forest, in the woods, on the sides of dirt roads, foraging these rocks. So even when I just look at these rocks, these are memories to me. My concrete table here was given to me by a precious friend, Mama C and Bubba. They gave us this concrete table. So every time I sit at this table, I have a thought of them. And my chandelier, I bought this at a flea market, I think, or an antique store, probably 25 or 30 years ago. And I had this in my very first herb garden, the very first garden I ever planted in our old home in Clanton. And I've brought it with me to my new garden on our farm. So it's just been, it's an antique piece that I found and I collected, and it's got memories. It's got history behind it. This pedestal here was in my mom's garden. It had like a concrete plaque type thing that had our last name on it, and it got broke, so I took the pedestal from my mom's garden. This was also Jean's Uncle Horace's garden plow, and Jean's dad gave this to me last week to add to our garden. So I'm super excited to add this old antique and this special piece from Jean's uncle to the garden too. This little rabbit concrete statue was given to me by my very best friend Terry Hannah, and it was her mother's that passed away, and she was very, very close to her mother, and she gave me this for my garden. And it's just so special. And every time I walk by this rabbit, I think of my sweet friend Terry. Also, the plants in your garden have history to them. They can either be plants that was passed along to you from your friends or your family, or given to you by somebody special, like my sweet rose here, Clotilde Super. I love this beautiful rose, and I have it planted on each side of my gate, flanking my gates. And this was given to me by my friend Lacey that I worked with at Petals. She gave me these two beautiful roses when we first bought our farm. So these are special. Every time I walk in my gates and I smell this beautiful rose and it's blooming, I think of my sweet friend Lacey and her two beautiful children that I adore, Calvin and Evelyn Clare. Include heirloom plants that have history themselves, like this Peggy Martin rose. It has a sweet history, a sweet story behind it. Find out the history and the story behind the heirloom plants that you're adding into your garden. It just makes it so much more special when you know the story behind the plant. Keep in mind colors and textures. The color and texture of your vegetables and your herbs and your flowers and your plants, and the combination of how they're going to look together when they're planted together. Don't get stuck in this and let this just paralyze you, but just keep in mind the colors and how they're going to work together, and the different textures of the different plants and vegetables and herbs. This is just like the accessories to your garden to me. By adding these elements of art and history to your potager garden, to cottage gardens, to any garden that you have, it just makes it so much more special. It makes it so much more beautiful and so much more meaningful.
Well, y'all, that wraps up episode 2 of our Potager Garden Design Series. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I love doing this. This is so much fun to me. Design and sharing all of these different principles and elements of design is just so exciting to me. I love it, and I'm so glad you guys are joining me in this series. Now, next episode, episode 3, we're going to be looking at designing your potager garden, the steps that you can take to design your potager garden. So y'all stay tuned for that. Now, I'm not going to promise you that it's going to be out next week because I'm not getting in a hurry putting these videos together. I'm trying to create lovely and beautiful videos that have a lot of really good information in them that you guys can use and will get value from. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. God bless you, and I'll see y'all in the next video.